Hi, I'm Jake, and today we're going to be looking at a Dell R730. We have a lot of Dell R730s in stock. It's a server that's going to be supported probably for the next 5 years. We tend to sell quite a few of these. The operating system the most current operating system that's supported on these is Windows Server 2019. So you should get a few years out of these. The latest generation is 3 generations higher than this. But like I said, we have a ton of these. They're relatively cheap. It's a good entry-level server for any business that's looking to get a server into their environment on a budget. So today we're going to be building this server up. I got a lot of parts, pieces here. Before we get into the build up, I actually want to talk about some of the stuff that we do prior to parts going into servers. CCNY Tech, we offer a 3-year warranty on every single server that we sell. That comes with it. Desktops, we're going to warranty for up to 1 year. So we have to have a very solid process to make sure that these servers are put together correctly to last. One thing I want to mention, this is our studio. So the people that might watch this that have a high knowledge of technology, they might see that I'm not wearing any ESD. I'll even admit I don't have any ESD mats on the floor that I'm standing on. That's all out in our lab, all out in our production area. I can promise you that we've hired nothing but professionals and we do this all professionally. I don't have an exact stat, but I can tell you we have very few servers that come back to our facility due to warranty repairs. So first thing that we do, we might receive a server that's already built, may already have a bunch of parts and pieces in it. We don't just turn around and sell it. So what we actually do is we will pop the cover off, which I've already done, and we start to disassemble. So as you can see, I've already disassembled everything here prior to starting the video. We've got our fans, we've got our heat sinks, we've got our NIC cards, we've got our riser cards, we've got our Perc, we've got our drives. The one thing that I'm missing here is memory, but we can talk about that a little bit more when we get into the build segment of the video. So first thing that we do, we pull off our heat sinks and we remove all of our memory. When we go to check to make sure that our parts are good, the things that we're going to be looking for on our heat sinks is what does the coloration of the old thermal compound look like. A lot of times these have been running for thousands of hours. We want to make sure that we're putting fresh new thermal compound on there. And we also make sure that on the heat sinks that there isn't any deep scratches or any fingerprints or anything like that. When we clean these, we don't just take them over to our sink and wash them under some water. We actually have to use a very special rubbing alcohol. So isopropyl alcohol. This leaves the least amount of residue once dry. There is alcohol that you can get from like the drugstore that you could do this with. We've done it with when we're in a pinch out in the field. But for the most part, you want to try to stick with the isopropyl alcohol, and we can link that in the video as to what exactly that you should use in our show notes. Once we've done that, we've cleaned this off, we also take a look at our processors. So those get popped out. We're going to look for things like discoloration in our pins. All right, so now I'm saying pins. It's really not pins anymore on server processors. But we tend to look, sometimes we'll work behind a technician when we get these out. There might be some fingerprints, some discoloration. We want to make sure that these processors that we're putting in these systems don't have any of that, signs of wear and tear, and maybe even mishandled. The other thing that we do is we take a look at our fans. So these systems, when we get them in and they already have all the parts in, we actually boot these up. We check to make sure that all of the fans spin. We make sure that there isn't any rattle or anything with these as well. And then they get put off to the side. The good ones get put off to the side. We keep them, throw the bad ones out, or recycle the bad ones. The other thing that we do is we pull out our Perc Card. The Perc Cards have a battery that's on them. And the Perc Cards, when they get really hot or if they're running in a bad environment, have a tendency to actually expand and explode the battery out a little bit. And we've seen quite a few of those. We've seen servers in rough environments that actually are in production have that problem. So we go ahead and we just either replace the whole Perc Card because we can get it relatively cheap, or we go ahead and we replace the battery on it. Either is a viable option. We also take our memory out and we take a look at our riser cards as well. The riser cards are just to basically be able to have some expansion in your PCIs. That could be, let's say we want to fill this full of copper ports, we want to fill it full of fiber ports, HBAs, anything like that. That's how you can expand that. So one thing that we do look at before we move on is we check to make sure that the gold doesn't have any tarnish on any of our components. So memory, for example, memory gets handled quite a bit, usually by technicians. If that server's in or out, tendency is people want to touch the gold. I don't know what it is. Get new technicians in. When we train them, don't touch the gold. Please do not touch the gold. The last thing I talk about before we get into our build is I got two more things. Hard drives. So we do sell used hard drives. However, we do not sell bad used hard drives. And how do we tell if they're bad? One easy method is just the simple ear test. We hear to see if the drive is winding, if it's clicking, making unusual sound. That means that the drive is bad. The other step that we do, because we are what's called R2 certified, we have to make sure that all the data is wiped off of them. Well, as part of that process, we also measure to see how many hours these drives have on them. On the drive itself, there's actually a controller on it that measures how long this drive has been powered on and spins. We do not sell drives that have more than 30,000 hours on them. They're not gonna last. We don't like to sell bad used parts. It's not good for business. The other thing that we do too, as part of a server build, just something to take into consideration when we're speccing servers, is every server that we do, I personally like having 2 drives in RAID 1 to run my operating system. We'll talk about that probably more in some further videos where we go over how to set up our RAID controller, installing the drives. Obviously, I don't have a table full of drives to go over today. We're really just talking about the components that we're putting into our server, how we do it, how we make sure that the server is ready to ship. The last thing that I want to mention is memory. We talked about the memory, not touching the gold on the memory, but it's definitely worth mentioning when we go to build these. We just want to make sure that memory follows the process that's on the top case. So on your top case, there is some instructions on how memory gets laid out. We're going to talk about that more as we get into the server build. We're going to talk about how we apply our thermal paste, good techniques and everything for putting in your processors, applying that paste, and basically getting a server together to run for the next 3 years. So, without further ado, let's get into the build.